Imagine the greatest detective who ever lived, sitting in a darkened room, knees pulled to his chest, a cup of tea balanced between two fingers. Now imagine he's staring at a map of Europe. The year is 1939. 50 million people are about to die. He has been given one case, one impossible case: stop the war. L does not panic. L never panics. His win rate is 100%. And already, within seconds of studying that map, he sees something that every world leader, every general, every diplomat in the world completely missed. Most people look at World War II and see a war. L looks at it and sees a chain of decisions made by human beings with motives and fears and blind spots. And blind spots, L knows better than anyone, are the only place where a case can actually be cracked. So this is the real question, not whether L is real, not whether anime and history should be in the same room. The question is, what does it actually take to stop a world war? And what does the answer reveal about how close the world came, dozens of times across multiple decades, to a completely different history? To understand what L would do, you have to understand what L is. He is not a fighter, he is not a soldier, he does not carry a weapon. What L carries is something far more dangerous: the ability to see a system from the outside while everyone else is trapped inside it. Psychologist Philip Tetlock, who spent decades studying expert forecasting and prediction, called this kind of thinker a super forecaster. Someone who does not lock onto a single narrative, someone who holds multiple hypotheses at once, updates them as new evidence arrives, and never ever confuses confidence with accuracy. L is, in every measurable sense, a super forecaster. And a super forecaster looking at Europe in 1933 would have seen what almost no one saw in real time. That Adolf Hitler was not inevitable, that the Nazi rise to power was not destiny, that it was a sequence of contingent decisions, each one reversible, each one dependent on the one before it. Here is the chain. Germany loses World War I. The Treaty of Versailles strips the country of territory, imposes crippling reparations, and laces the national humiliation into the legal language of a document that millions of Germans are forced to accept. The Weimar Republic that replaces the old government inherits a broken economy and no deep tradition of democratic culture to hold it together when things get hard. Inflation spirals into something almost impossible to describe: wheelbarrows of paper currency to buy a single loaf of bread. People are not just angry, they are terrified. And terror does something specific to human psychology. It does not make people want more freedom, it makes them want to surrender freedom to someone who radiates certainty. Someone who offers a simple story, someone who gives them a clear enemy and tells them the enemy is the reason for all the pain. Social psychologist Erich Fromm wrote about this in his 1941 work, Escape from Freedom. He argued that fascism does not rise from strength, it rises from the unbearable weight of economic and social collapse landing on people who have no framework left to process it. Hitler was that someone. But L would not start with the psychology, L would go to the economics, specifically to a single number. In the German federal election of 1928, the Nazi Party received 2.6% of the vote. 2.6. They were a fringe movement, a joke. Then October 1929 arrives. The Wall Street crash triggers a global economic collapse. American loans that had been propping up the German economy flood back out. Unemployment in Germany surges past 30%. By 1932, the Nazis receive 37.4% of the vote. L would stare at those two numbers for a very long time. 2.6, then 37.4, 4 years apart. Not because of propaganda alone, not because of ideology alone, because of a depression that nobody stopped. Economist Milton Friedman and historian Anna Artz argued in their landmark 1963 work, A Monetary History of the United States, that the Great Depression was not inevitable. It was a policy failure. The Federal Reserve, facing a contracting economy, raised interest rates instead of cutting them. It withdrew money from the system at the exact moment the system needed more. The depression deepened when it could have been contained. And the damage crossed the Atlantic and handed Adolf Hitler precisely the conditions he needed. L draws a single line on his map. The war does not begin in Poland in 1939. The war begins on Wall Street in 1929. The weapon is not a gun. The weapon is an interest rate decision made in a room full of economists who could not see the chain they were setting in motion. So what would L actually do? His first move would not involve Hitler at all. L would work backward through the financial chain and identify the critical Federal Reserve decision that transformed the recession into a catastrophe. He would feed information to the right economists, the right journalists, the right political voices. Quietly, invisibly, not to cause a panic, to prevent one. If the depression is softened, Germany stabilizes. If Germany stabilizes, the Nazis stay at 2.6%. There is no path to power. There is no war. But L is never running just one angle. His second track targets March 1936. Hitler gambles everything on remilitarizing the Rhineland, a direct violation of the Versailles Treaty. His own generals warn him it is suicidal. The German army at that moment is vastly outnumbered by French forces. Hitler later admitted in private that if France had mobilized, Germany would have been forced to retreat immediately, and the humiliation would almost certainly have ended his government from within. France does not mobilize. Britain does not mobilize. Both countries are still living inside the trauma of 14 million dead from the previous war. They want peace so badly, they cannot afford to see what is actually happening in front of them. L would have seen it. And L would have sent one document, delivered anonymously to the French High Command, detailing Hitler's own private assessment of the Rhineland operation. His admission that it was a bluff. His acknowledgement that he would fold the moment he met real resistance. That document actually existed. German military officers produced it. The French simply never acted on it. L would make sure they did. His third track targets September 1938, the Munich Agreement. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flies to Germany and, in exchange for a promise of lasting peace, hands Hitler the Sudetenland, a large portion of Czechoslovakia. He returns to London waving a piece of paper and announces peace for our time. Winston Churchill, watching from the opposition benches, immediately calls it a total and unmitigated defeat. L would agree. Not because Chamberlain was foolish, because Chamberlain was reasoning from inside the system. He could not see what Hitler said about him when the cameras were off. In documents and recordings that only emerged after the war, Hitler referred to Chamberlain with open contempt. He viewed the willingness to negotiate not as diplomacy, but as confirmation that the Western powers were too exhausted and too frightened to fight. And he accelerated his timeline accordingly. L would have made those private remarks visible before the flight to Munich. One conversation revealed at the right moment. Chamberlain holds the line. Czechoslovakia is not surrendered. And the group of German military officers who were at that exact moment plotting a coup against Hitler, a conspiracy documented in extraordinary detail by historian Harold Deutsch in his 1968 work The Conspiracy Against Hitler in the Twilight War. Those officers proceed, not because L puts them up to it, because L gives them the window they need. Hitler falls, not from a bullet, not from an army, from his own generals. Because the system finally cracks in the right direction at the right time. Here is what is almost unbearable about all of this. L would not have needed all three interventions. Any single one, executed correctly and at the right moment, might have been enough. The war was not a natural disaster. It was not written into the laws of physics. It was a series of narrow corridors, and history walked through every single war's door available. Every pivot point closed in the wrong direction, every time, for 15 straight years. What L would understand that the actual world could not was this. World War II was a failure of information, a failure of imagination. A failure to look at a system from the outside and trace the real chain of cause and effect back to where it actually began. L's greatest weapon was never his deductive genius, it was his refusal to accept the frame everyone else was already using. When the world looked at Hitler, they saw a politician they could negotiate with, a man they could manage, a problem they could contain. L would have looked at the same man and seen a data point in an economic chain that started a decade earlier and could have been interrupted at any one of a dozen places. And here is what should stay with you long after this video ends. You live in a world right now where every major crisis follows exactly the same structure. Every conflict, every collapse, every institution that slowly fails and then suddenly fails all at once. It is always a chain of contingent decisions, always pivot points that look obvious in hindsight and completely invisible in the moment. Always people so deep inside the system that they cannot see the system itself. L's method is not fantasy. Super forecasters exist in the real world. Tetlock's research showed that they outperform intelligence analysts, military strategists, and economic experts in documented controlled studies. Not because they are smarter, because they are willing to hold the uncomfortable question a little longer. Because they refuse to close a hypothesis before the evidence demands it. You can ask that question right now, about anything you are watching in the world today. What is the real chain here? Where did it actually begin? And where is the pivot point before the last door closes? Imagine a detective sitting in a darkened room, knees pulled to his chest, a cup of tea balanced between two fingers. He is not looking at a map of 1939 Europe, he is looking at the world you are living in right now. And the case is still open.